Good morning or good afternoon or wherever you are. It's Matt Coleman, your host from Magnify World. Our company champions the augmented reality and virtual reality sector. And today we have a very special guest. Actually, I think you're in Palm Springs today, but you live in Los Angeles, Skip. How's it going there?
Hot.
No surprise.
115 degrees outside. That's why I'm in this hotel room. I'm not in that metro.
So, Skip, you're the research director at USC Institute for Creative Technologies, but you also specialize in the medical area with virtual reality. But look, before we get into this, I want to have a bit of fun because your university days, we've got something very much in common outside of AR and VR, and it's rugby. Rugby union, that is, if no one's heard of it out there. It's a team sport with a rugby ball, nothing to do with anything else, but we used to play it, right? We never played against each other, of course, but tell us about how you got into that.
Well, we used to refer to our team as we're a drinking team with a rugby problem. And
yeah, well, that'd be right at university.
I looked out in this whole area where I saw an ad in the paper for rugby when I went to graduate school, and I didn't know anything about it. But I didn't have any friends. I'd moved to New Orleans at the time, and I went to practice. I called the guy up. He told me where practice was. That night, I made my best friends for the whole time I lived in New Orleans. And still to this day, many of them I'm still good friends with. It was a great sport. You know, it's like you say, it's a team sport. There's position on the field for every body type and mentality, but it's all going to come together as a team. And it's not unlike when you have things work just right, when you have a good team together building VR environments, you know, where you have a good idea and you have a good developer, a programmer, or a graphic artist, or somebody that understands the interface. You got to have all that for the magic to happen. And I think I learned a little of that from playing rugby.
Excellent. It's a fun sport. I was saying to you before, my dad used to be the coach and I was only 6 years old. So I've played it for many, many years, maybe by default, but I don't know, I still enjoyed it. So moving on and into the business of where we are. So you've been with USC for 25 years as a scientist and researcher. Can you tell us, how you got into this and your progression into the VR side of the business, particularly? So I know you're doing other areas inside the medical sector, but tell us, because VR to a lot of people has been around for a while, longer than 5 years, I mean, when I say a while. But you must have been practicing in it for many years.
Well, before I came to USC to start our VR lab, I worked clinically, and I worked in the area of brain injury rehabilitation. I'm a clinical psychologist. And I was very frustrated with the tools that we had to help people recover their cognitive function after, a car accident, a brain injury, or a stroke, or whatever the source of that was. A lot of paper and pencil workbook exercises. And then I started to see in the early 90s, I had a client that came in my office with a Game Boy, and I'd never seen one before. And he goes, "You got to see this." And basically it was a kid that was 22, impossible to keep him motivated on a traditional task. But here he was, glued to this Game Boy. And I watched him for like 20 minutes playing Tetris, Tetris Warlord, literally. And that opened my eyes to the idea that we could leverage digital technology, even in a simple handheld device, maybe as a way to engage our patients in doing the kinds of things that would help them, redevelop their cognitive abilities, improve brain function, and so forth. Then I learned about virtual reality. I heard an NPR report with Jerry Lanier talking about it. That was, I think, 93. And the light bulb went off. If we could use simulation technology with, virtual reality to put people in challenging contexts, but maybe add some game element to it, where they could learn everyday skills and help recover their attention, memory, executive function, but almost seamlessly because it was kind of fun and engaging. that maybe we'd be onto something. And the interesting thing was the day after I heard this report, and I bought a book on VR, I went in to talk to the director of our center, and I said, hey, this VR thing, I think it's going to be something maybe in our field. And she goes, it's funny you say that. Here's a flyer I just got yesterday for a conference called Virtual Reality in Persons with Disabilities. And it was like, whoa. And she goes, well, if you want to go, the center will cover your trip. And of course, and I went, I saw what people were doing, and I went back the next year where I presented a paper on the connection between VR, not knowing the limitations of VR at that time. I had the lawnmower man vision of VR, but but it made sense. The vision was sound. The technology just wasn't all that mature. But unfortunately, I didn't realize how mature the technology was at that time, and so I ended up packing it in clinically and moving to USC, where I started a lab in 1996, actually. And it was on a prayer and a whisper. I took a postdoc at USC in Alzheimer's, in an Alzheimer's center, but across the street was a computer science department. So I went across the street, just cold called, knocked on doors, and finally found a computer scientist that, got the idea, gave me a student programmer, a bunch of equipment, the primitive equipment of the day. And we were off to the races. And that's how it all started. 25 years later now, technology finally has caught up with the vision. And we've done a lot of research. So, probably in mental health and rehabilitation, this is probably the largest scientific literature for VR and AR of any use case. So, we're at a time now where technology's gotten better. And we've got some science, so we know, we know a bit. We still have a lot more to do, but we know a good bit about where we can apply this effectively and make a difference for people.
So, Skip, you mentioned Ayatollah of VR. What does that mean?
That was a joke. That was a post rugby match drinking story, But it ended up on my LinkedIn. People were calling me that as a joke. There used to be a line in the movie Road Warrior, the Ayatollah of rock and roll. That movie. I was the Ayatollah of VR.
So tell me, what are the big areas that you're investigating? I mean, you mentioned Alzheimer's disease. There's obviously stroke and a bunch of other clinical areas you've been evaluating. But there's psychology around all of this. And tell us, what could be the big breakthrough in the next couple of years, and what have you learned, and what areas of the business? Because we really want to get this, message out.
Sure. Well, there's a number of areas where the science has showed us that VR can take existing clinical applications, clinical therapies, and make them more engaging, more compelling, more systematically controllable, all the things that good simulation technology allows. So we can help people confront their fears and get over their fears, irrational fears. We can help them revisit their trauma at a pace they can handle and eventually reprocess those difficult emotional memories in that act of confronting what they went through and actually get better. We can design game-based rehabilitation, what got me into this in the first place, not just for cognitive abilities, but in physical therapy, occupational therapy, where now we have capability to really track body movement quite effectively, actually going back to around 2009, 2010 with the Connect, where we use that as a low-cost, easy way to track body movement and put it in a game-like context to help people do better physical therapy and so on.
You're talking about the Xbox Connect there, I assume?
Yeah. And that was actually a big breakthrough, because up to that point, we were putting LED markers on different body parts, or we had magnetic trackers with a field generator, very expensive and cumbersome. But here you had a low-cost camera depth sensing camera that you could track body movement, do range of motion, bimanual coordination, but do it in a game. Because that's a big problem with rehab, is that people don't do enough of it. It's very boring, repetitive, and frustrating. Imagine you have a stroke one day and you can't move your right arm anywhere near like you could before. And your therapist is telling you, okay, I want you to do these exercises 100 times a day, 100 repetitions. And you're watching a hand that can hardly move. Extremely frustrating, because you know what you had before. But now all of a sudden, whether you're interacting on a big screen as an avatar or you're in a head-mounted display and these body movements are being tracked, all of a sudden you can amplify those movements a little bit. So a little movement like this turns into a larger movement that allows you to interact in a game. We actually when the Kinect came out, we actually built a version of World of Warcraft where you could actually use body movements to do some of the different activities in that game.
I see.
So, you engage people in something. At the same time, the technology allows you to measure changes and present that feedback to somebody. So somebody says, I haven't improved. My hand is rotating only this much. Well, actually, it has improved. The degrees of rotation have improved since last week. You just don't see it. Right. You've got a bias, you're frustrated. So that's where the body element, the embodied activity in a VR environment really can make a difference, as well as a number of other areas that people are exploring now with body swapping and body transfers and so on. Mel Slater's work, which is quite impressive in this area to help people.
And can you explain what his work is?
Well, one classic example, I think that'll be intuitive for the audience, because this stuff can get out in the weeds. I mean, he's done things like with people with phantom limb pain, where you do the mirror box thing, where you move the preserved limb, but what you see in the headset is the missing limb doing the action. And that has an effect on the brain that's beyond me to fully understand. But all of a sudden, pain that is phantom, there's no limb there, but people still experience it. It's still there, and they have painful perceptions of it. All of a sudden, that starts to diminish a little bit. But the more intuitive one is he's taken folks, and this is with a group in the UK, Chris Bruin, I think Diane Falconer, where they've taken people with major depression. And one of the problems with depression is that people that are depressed often have poor self-compassion. If they do something good, they think it was just luck. If they do something bad, it's because they're a bad person. They'll never get better. So they would put the depressed person in a room, virtual room, and have a child that is in a state of distress. And they had already coached the person on how to be compassionate to this child. So directing the compassion to the child was easy for them. They couldn't do it for themselves, but they could direct it outwardly. And so they were very compassionate to this virtual child. Don't worry, things will get better. This isn't permanent, things like that. And then flip a switch, and that person now is in the role of that child, and they replay the capture of themselves being compassionate to the child. But now that person's in the role of the child. And it sounds like, well, how could that really make a big difference? But they have data where they actually show a change in self-compassionate inner speech, but then also symptoms changing in terms of depression. And so in that embodied way, it may be possible to change how we interpret the world around us and how we think about it in terms of how good we are to each other, because depression's a horrible thing. Everything is negatively biased. So anything that can chink away at that bias and help a person to become more self-compassionate. And I challenge people to think of a way you could do that same process without VR. Maybe you could have the person record positive statements and play it in their ear. Maybe, but that embodied element is where the power of this stuff comes in. And so there's a whole bunch of these things. They've done a study where they look at people that the court has mandated because they've abused a partner, an intimate partner abuse situation. They put them in an environment where they tell them, okay, I want you to act out what you did that made your wife or your partner, fearful of you. And so they act it out, but it's all being captured with motion tracking. Then they create the virtual version of the scene. And now you're in the place of the abused partner. And now you're seeing yourself, coming at you and so on. And so for some people, whether you want to say it builds empathy for the victim, or it builds a better awareness that something you thought wasn't such a big deal. Well, I got a little upset. All of a sudden you're seeing what that upsetness does to another person. Again, how do you do that? I mean, we're in the past in psychology, we've always been limited by doing these things in imagination, right? Close your eyes. Imagine you're sitting at the kitchen table. Now, imagine, your wife and you come into the room and you're yelling at her for this or that, whatever it is. Imagination is a good start, but I think there's nothing like the experiential learning that VR can provide, and with an emotionally evocative situation. So, these are some of the areas where I think, we have a lot. It's a paradigm shift. It's, Myron Kruger, one of the early godfathers in VR, really, he said it in 1993, and I think it was the first issue of the journal Presence. And it was an article called The Experience Society. And he said that, virtual reality arrives at a time when computer processing is moving from automating the paradigms of the past to creating new ones for the future. And I think that's a very important line there that's relevant here. I mean, computers are great at automating processes, but what VR does is it takes this capacity to put you in an experience, an emotionally evocative experience. And that's something we haven't been able to do in this way in the past. Some people can say you get that from reading a book, or you get that from watching a movie. Sure, those forms of media have some value in those areas, but it's not the same thing as being in a simulated environment where you're really there.
Agree. Yeah. Maybe the only thing that's been pushed out there in the last 12 months, obviously we've all seen the Calm app, actually. It's more music to your ears, I guess, right? But, you're right. I must admit, I've just done my first avatar VR interview upstairs before we spoke today. And it was a pre-production meeting, you could say, right? So next week, we've been discussing what locations around planet Earth we're going to be talking on and walking around. And, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, you would never have even imagined, one of the interesting companies that we're talking to, they're based out of Seattle, called Pluto VR. I'd never thought in my life I'd be, interviewing someone in VR. But, look at the success with the gaming industry and the virtual concerts even. And there is no concerts, right? That's the only way you're going to ever do it, is actually online or in a game. You have to go into these environments to interact. So I think, from the medical side of the business, I think the younger generation are going to, rapidly take up the opportunities that you've been developing in the last 10 to 20 years. I did want to talk about the fear factor for a moment. Do you remember that TV show called The Fear Factor, where you got put in a box and there was a bunch of snakes? You felt like you're in a James Bond movie in the Caribbean on an island probably, and you never thought you'd get out again. But tell us about the psychology again around fear in particular, and how, that's just a simple example, the snake example, but there must be a lot of things that you can talk about in regards to the fear of heights.
Sure. Well, I think the thing to keep in mind at the start of this conversation is that there are some things that should be feared, and certainly being in a box full of snakes, that might be one of them. When we focus on this area, we really look at phobias, diagnostic conditions where people have a fear of something that really doesn't pose a threat. And so one of the classic examples would be fear of flying. Now, certainly it'd be a horrible way to die, but you'd have to have probably 3 or 4 planes fall out of the sky every day to match the number of people that die in motor vehicle accidents worldwide. But people don't have fear of flying. They're totally calm driving in a car. And so that would be an example of someone that would put themselves at more risk driving cross country rather than flying. Fear of heights, not taking a job on a 2nd or 3rd floor building because the thought of the building collapsing or you falling out a window, or fear of public speaking. These are all these kinds of things that really pose no inherent real threat in everyday life, but limit people from, engaging in life and doing things that they can grow from. Now, fear of public speaking, look, we all had or have that to some degree, but we make it way worse by imagining the worst case scenarios, but once you do it a few times and, you get through it and you get better at it, it becomes a skill. That's an area where, you can get fear of public speaking scenarios on your lowest cost VR headset as a free download. Practicing in front of a group of people. Well, the whole point with the exposure therapy is to address these, I don't want to say irrational fears, but these fears that really are based in something that doesn't have a real threat. But to help a person to confront that fear and see that nothing bad happens. And they're not going to get it one time. They got to do it over and over and over. And all of a sudden, a process in the brain we call extinction learning, where you're in the presence of the fearful stimuli, and your amygdala lights up, and you run away, you avoid. You never go through the whole process of confronting the fear and finding out there's no threat. Well, eventually, as you do that more and more in VR, that amygdala area of the brain, the fight or flight area, doesn't light up as much. It's learned now that those cues really pose no inherent threat. And so that was one of the early low-hanging fruit applications in virtual reality, because we could do it even in 1995 with even impoverished graphics. And there's an important area in VR is that it doesn't always have to be an exact replica of reality to activate or promote some process for change. So even if you're walking on a cartoon-like Indiana Jones type plank bridge over a ravine, you're getting that activation because the perceptual cues, even in an impoverished graphic world, the perceptual cues are close enough, and people with phobias react to anything that has a whiff of what they're fearful of. And so you can activate that fear and anxiety, but get the person to still do it. And as they do it more and more, that activation extinguishes or diminishes, habituates, some people say. And now they can do it. And what is learned in the virtual world in this area often transfers to the real world, so that you have people taking a job on a 50th floor skyscraper in New York City, or flying commercial airlines, or giving great speeches in front of groups of people, starting off maybe, easy level. But you get people to do the things that they wouldn't do in the real world because they're so terrified. And that is part of what VR can do. It's emotionally evocative, even in a primitive form. And it can help people to confront and reprocess these difficult situations. And we carry that same thing over to post-traumatic stress disorder, where a lot of times people say, why the hell would you do that? Why would you torture somebody to go back to the scene of the crime where, their best friend got blown up in Iraq, or they got physically assaulted somewhere, or in a car accident? Well, we don't throw people in the deep end of the pool initially. We start off at a pace they can handle and gradually try to circumvent that avoidance in a safe place with a well-trained clinician. And as they do that repeatedly, they're not losing their memory of the bad thing that happened. It'll always be a sad event, but they're not constricted, and they're not always avoidant, and they're not always hypervigilant, the cardinal symptoms of post-traumatic stress. So it helps them to reprocess. And there's definitely a brain process that's going on here that supports it. And there's some research to show, like with that area, the amygdala in the brain, that before and after this kind of trauma-focused confrontation, exposure therapy, that amygdala lights up a lot less after good treatment.
When you talk about triggers before, for phobias, is there a number of times in your research that someone is exposed to something that they will change? So, for example, if you show some confidence in public speaking and you're going through your program, just that, it's fear of public speaking, hopefully that's an easy one for you to answer. But if they watch that, say, 100 times, or they interact 100 times, it's obviously 100 times better than where they were, but will they be able to take a very, very confident step outside of watching it 10 or it's just a repetitive thing, I know, but what are the triggers in between that elastic band there?
Well, we do know that the data does show in these exposure therapy applications that you can do a lot of trials, you do a lot of repetitions, and that does typically lead to a reduction in the fear. Person may still be fearful when they get up in front of that crowd to do their talk, and maybe that's a good activating level of anxiety, but they're not, stuttering and freezing up and wanting to run out of the room. They can gradually face the real challenge in the real world and still feel fear, but as they do it more and more, that fear diminishes. So they're getting the exposure in the real world. And a lot of times with PTSD particularly, we see that people get down to a certain baseline at the end of treatment, but now they're out of treatment and now they're facing the world. And instead of hiding out in their basement or being anxious when they drive a car because they see trash by the side of the road that's a trigger for where an IED was hidden in Iraq that blew up their best friend. Instead of, swerving off the road, they remember it. It's a bad event, but they can be functional. And that's what we're not erasing memories. We're trying to help people become functional and not live in a constricted world that's governed by this chronic fear of things that really pose no threat now.
Yeah, I mean, look, the veterans conversation, you could probably talk for days on this because that's one of the specialties that I believe you're focused on is the military side of it. Without, talking about anything too confidential, can you tell us the focus around this and what you're trying to achieve in that area? Because it's obviously a quite important area because we're talking about post-traumatic stress here from war times. It could be one, and I'm sure there's a whole host of other things. And suicide rates, in that veteran area aren't that great, right? And when I say aren't that great, they're way too many.
At least 20 a day on average.
Yeah, it's obviously not acceptable, is it? But how are you assisting in that area?
Well, we started in this work in 2003 and have incrementally evolved the software and the research over all these years, where we have solid clinical trials showing VR's effectiveness and that it might appeal to people that wouldn't seek treatment in a traditional form. We did one study, a randomized controlled trial recently, where we in the very beginning of the study, we asked people, we told them that this is research. You may get assigned to the traditional imagination-only method, or you may get this VR exposure. We explained both, and they signed off. They're going to participate knowing they would be randomly assigned to either one. And then we asked them, if you had your choice, what would you pick? 77% said they would picked virtual reality exposure over the traditional method. So aside from all the efficacy stuff alone, we're able to pull people into therapy that might avoid it. We're breaking down barriers to care. And I think that's a sort of a hidden element of the VR work, is that it does appeal, and particularly for, digital generation folks. So, over the years, we've documented its value, and now we work with a nonprofit that will, with our latest version, they give the equipment for free from donations to any VA that wants to use this. And we give the software. And this is promoted this now, not just as some harebrained Star Trek scheme, but actually an evidence-based, validated approach to treatment. Not the be-all and end-all, not the magic bullet, but for somebody who, wants to do therapy, when people have a choice in their therapeutic approach, they tend to do better when they feel more empowered. So now you've got this traditional stuff. If that's right for you, rock on. But with VR, and we also find VR is more activating for people that also have comorbid depression. So that may be a recommendation that if somebody comes, and a lot of folks with PTSD are also depressed, we can bring them in and say, look, this might be what you need, that extra boost to help you move through the therapy. But in the end, give them a choice among a menu of evidence-based approaches. So that's where we're at over the years with the combat-related work. But back in 2017, we ran a study with military sexual trauma, fundamentally different type of trauma than worrying about getting shot or blown up or whatever in a combat environment. And a lot of sexual trauma in the military is happening in the U.S. at U.S. bases or local surroundings around a base, whatever. So we had to build a lot of different content for that. And everybody was very anxious about this work. They were saying, okay, we get the combat stuff, but sexual trauma, that's very intimate. You're going to re-traumatize people. Well, we got funded to do a safety and feasibility trial. And small sample, 11 people, and with really good clinicians at Emory University that we partnered with, we found not only did people not go running out of the room freaking out, there were no critical incidents, but we saw significant improvements in their PTSD symptoms, so clinically meaningful and statistically significant reductions in PTS symptoms. So that opened the door towards the idea now that we've got software in place, civilian-oriented software, that we could apply in the civilian world for civilian sexual trauma, which is certainly a big issue, an important issue. But we now are facing a post-COVID world where healthcare professionals are under extreme amounts of stress and may need a similar approach, maybe not exactly the same, but things that bring to bear these kinds of evidence-based models for how we treat that, as well as police, firefighters, first responders. There's plenty of trauma in the world. So my mission now is really to try to take everything we've learned from the military population, which goes beyond just treatment. It's also prevention of PTSD with pre-exposure before deployment, assessment of PTSD, putting people in simulations and looking at their physiological reactivity to get a better measure of, how spooked are they, and the treatment end of it. But to move all that to address the trauma needs of a world population that is ripping itself apart at the seams. And with what we're going through right now with COVID, I think there's a lot of ways to go in, whether it's the exposure approach or the relaxation approach, putting people in calming situations where they can learn to relax in ways that they wouldn't do in the real world because they're so anxious and uptight. Telling somebody, I want you to do this mindfulness exercise. Put one raisin in your mouth and close your eyes for 10 minutes and focus on the taste of that raisin. Somebody's going to say, okay, but how is that going to fix my PTSD? Or how is that going to fix my chronic pain? People, they don't have the anticipated benefit from those simple tasks in the real world. you can put that in a virtual world that's engaging and provocative in some ways. Maybe you get people to do enough of that meditation or relaxation or mindfulness training so they get that benefit. They see a change in their state.
Yeah.
So there's so many different ways that we can use VR from an informed scientific and clinical perspective. I think it's going to be a game changer as we move forward.
And look, what are you obviously work for one of the largest universities in the country or the world, and you probably have one of the largest medical research labs for this particular subject that I know of, probably the biggest. What are your pain points outside of not going to work at the moment?
Well,
when I say pain points, if one of our donors,
I've got a lot of pain points.
if one of our donors that are listening, or corporates that would like to fast forward, a VR solution for their staff, can they purchase this off you, the software? Can they donate $1 million to something in particular that they want to develop? I mean, how do you work with public and private monies and investments, in your sector?
Well, to the pain point element, a lot of times people don't realize that academics, particularly in my area, where I'm primarily research and on soft money, I have to run around with a tin cup all the time and write grants or pitch ideas all the time, just like in business, except there isn't a profit motive here, there's a science motive. And so I spend probably, and you hear this in politicians will say, the day after I got elected, I spent 6 hours a day fundraising for my next election, begging money from donors. It's the same thing here. I spend probably 60% of my time writing grants or presenting to possible investors or whatever in order to get the funding to do this. And a lot of times you have inspirational ideas that make a lot of sense, but you get in front of the head of a hospital and their question is, how is this going to generate revenue and how is this going to reduce costs? Then you've got to make that case that, well, by promoting health and wellness, you reduce the ultimate incidence of, say, heart disease or diabetes because you're changing behaviors, but you're not going to see that effect until 10 years down the road. And only will you see that effect if you do the research to document it. So there's all these kinds of challenges that come to play. I think it's getting easier now because you don't need $20,000 worth of equipment to demo a provocative and inspirational VR environment. You can do it on a $400 Oculus Quest in many cases, and give the person the view that what we've done in the lab all these years has given us a roadmap so that we can hit the bricks running with lower cost, commercially available systems, and also have a model for not just the science of behavior or psychological change, but the science of how do you promote access? How do you make this an efficient mechanism that is going to, improve your statistics in terms of health outcomes and subsequently reduce your ultimate costs? So those are the kinds of pitches. Now, I'm at a point in my career where I'm really tired of writing NIH grants, and I was very fortunate that I got in with the military in 2003 and 4 when there wasn't a lot of funding for VR, but the urgency of the PTSD problem in service members and veterans was pretty solid, and the military funded a lot of our work, and a lot of our work with virtual humans, which I can talk about later, but it evolved our research program at a time when there wasn't a lot of money. And I like to say that the Department of Defense is sort of like a venture capitalist that never expects to get paid back. Their payback is the public good and the military good, of course. But that kept our work going through all these years. So now we're in a state of readiness where I am regularly working with foundations or private donors to try to take everything that we've developed up to this point and get it out the door to have wider impact in the civilian sector. That's where my career is going to go. I'm an old guy. I'm 66. You know, what do I got, 15 good years left in me? I want those 15 good years to be spent getting stuff to escape the lab and to do it in a scientifically informed way, but to make a difference in the real world, not just in lab studies or demos when a dignitary comes through the lab or something, you know. That's the mission.
I'm glad we got that point across. So let's talk about virtual humans and possibly volumetric capture and what you know about that, and you know how that also can create empathy, and you can interact with virtual humans like I was an hour ago. So, how are you integrating that into the system?
We've done quite a bit of work since around 2006, leveraging, again, military developed virtual human interactions for leadership training, negotiation skill training, and so on, where you practice interacting with a virtual agent that has some level of AI, some voice recognition, some natural language processing. We leveraged that prior work to build out virtual patients for medical training, so that a medical student, our first project, could practice difficult clinical interviewing skills. You know, I like to say that gives them a chance to screw up a bunch with a virtual patient before they get their hands on a live one. And we have some studies over the years and evolved the software now where this is really how not just medical students, but psychologists, social workers, and so on are going to be trained in the future. You give them that experiential learning up front before they ever see a live patient. And, you know, just like the fear of public speaking. Well, you know, you're not just developing the reduction of the fear, but you're developing the competency to know how to conduct a sensitive but also information gathering interview. So that's one direction, but then completely different direction is helping people with autism deal with a job interview. So it's switched around. The agent now is, you know, a variety of different characters, different age, gender, ethnic background, and it can be set at different levels of provocativeness. And a person with autism who, in many cases, with high functioning autism, they're extremely bright, they're brilliant, they can do a job, but they choke during a social interaction. And so they don't get past the job interview because they're looking down at their shoes, they're answering in stereotypic ways, but they are willing to practice with a virtual agent and role play with a virtual agent in ways they won't do with a human. And all of a sudden, kind of like the phobia stuff and also like skill development, they get more comfortable. We've got 2 large studies showing improvements in face-to-face interviews after a course of training, and also improvements in self-efficacy for the interview process, so that they go in with more confidence and they know they can do it. So that's another role play case. The third area that we've worked in virtual humans is, and this is generic to many areas, we're going to see way more of it. A lot of people talk about chatbots, but we've developed healthcare support agents that are virtual characters that you can talk honestly and openly about your healthcare situation. You're just talking to software. There's no shame. There's no resistance. And you can get information about what you're going through in a more honest interchange. And we've documented that with research as well, finding that people are less worried about shame or oppression management when they know they're talking to software, if the software is credible, of course. And they self-disclose more personal information, reveal more incidents of sadness. Veterans coming back from Afghanistan showed that they would self-disclose more psychological symptoms from their deployment than they would in a standard assessment of those things. So we find that there's this, contrary to what people might have thought about virtual humans before, that they were cold and nobody would relate to them and just software. We're finding that this may be a vehicle where people tend to feel safer in their discussions. Now, certainly we're not eliminating the need for live flesh and blood clinicians, but in certain places, when somebody is hesitant to ever go see that shrink or that MD for a personal problem, a personal medical problem, they might be willing to put a toe in the water with these kinds of healthcare support agents. So that's another area that we've focused on.
You've got so much great content and research. We really
they're a good team. A good team. I come up with harebrained schemes, and programmers, artists, software engineers, all those folks, they do the magic.
Just to finish up here, what do you think the future of education looks like in general, not just for, AR and VR? There's smart glasses coming, which could make your experience more accessible to the public. But outside of that, no one really knows. It seems like the colleges and some universities, of course, are a little bit underprepared. In every business, it's not just universities, but we're talking education. Of course, there's not a lot of e-learning platforms that are even supporting children.
Right.
How do you see education?
I see the area of education is really where the bigger market is, even though a lot of people disagree. They say it's healthcare. I think education, now that we're getting to the point where, say, children or anybody in any educational format can afford to have their own personal display device. And with 5G, being able to have streaming content, the biggest barrier, I believe, was the cost and the complexity of VR equipment with tethered headsets and individual computers and so on. Now that we have these virtual reality iPods, if you will, that can serve to display this content, there are so many areas where education can benefit. If you look at how do people learn best, is it from reading out of a book? Well, for some content, perhaps. Is it from sitting through a lecture, death by PowerPoint? Well, you can pick up a lot of stuff that way too. But people learn better, faster, and more durable learning from experiential learning and from narrative, storytelling. If we can bring storytelling into the mix, and it's about engagement. And this is the challenge for what we're going through this controversy about opening up the schools or doing online education right now. Online education is so goddamn boring. We're absent of the social connection and the experience of being in a place with learning. But if you can, and I'm not saying wholesale eliminate that in the future, we have to deal with the hand we're dealt with right now. But I imagine we certainly will go back to the experience of learning with groups and with people. But if you can engage children or any person in content and empower them to understand something that they couldn't get from an abstract formula, they could actually see a process happen, whether it's a chemical transformation that by moving their arm this way, they add in a certain element, they move it this way, you add heat or whatever, all of a sudden you're embodying an experiential learning mechanism that gives people a visualization for how processes work, down from physics and chemistry and basic biological science, all the way up to how do you defuse a bullying situation. You can lecture a kid, a million times, but until they go through an experience and learn strategies for diffusing that experience, it's not going to be effective. And we proposed a project right now for virtual reality escape room strategy for teaching kids how to avoid contracting any pathogen-based infection, but COVID specifically right now, and how not to transfer it to their grandmother. And so to build it in a game-like context where, somebody sneezes in a 7-Eleven, and then that kid goes over and picks up the comic book near where the person sneezed, and all of a sudden their hand starts to glow green or whatever, and it stays green, and they go home and they got to navigate the kitchen and they have to touch things, and that green comes off on the refrigerator handle, the door thing, and then her grandmother comes in the room. Oh, give me a hug, Sonny, whatever. And then the green starts to flow across the grandmother. You can get gory and you get crazy, but sometimes you got to engage kids. But to be able to do stuff like that is a very simple thing, but it underscores experience, narrative, visualization, ways to make unseen knowledge seeable and maybe in a fun way. Maybe, you get a lot of points.
Gamification.
If you don't.
That's what you're saying. Yeah. Hey, Skip, very interesting insights today, and love your thoughts on, the medical and VR field. You've certainly been a champion over 25 odd years. So really appreciate your time today. Can you give yourself a shout out on where people can find you at USC?
Yes. If folks are interested in learning more, my email is my last name, Rizzo @ict.usc.edu. It's easy to find anyway. If you punch in USC, you'll find me. I do a lot of presentations and talk about this and have a few publications. Send me an email, reach out. I can send you copies of papers or white papers or publications or my slide decks that have a lot of narrative content in them. I have a YouTube channel. If you punch in my full name, Albert Skip Rizzo, on YouTube, got about 100 or so videos of projects we've worked on. And so I'd love to hear from people that are interested in helping to move us into the future of healthcare, education, and human well-being.
Skip, thank you very much again, and you have a great afternoon in Palm Springs.
All right. Thanks for having me. See you.
Yeah.